Leading one of the most influential churches in America is no small task. Shawn Williams is the new senior pastor at Willow Creek Community Church, where he's taken on the monumental responsibility of leading a congregation that has shaped Christianity for decades. Combining strong leadership with a genuine heart for teaching, Shawn is passionate about reaching people who may feel far from faith and helping them take meaningful steps toward becoming fully devoted followers of Jesus. But here's what makes Shawn unique. He's currently on a journey to complete all 6 of the World Major Marathon, a goal that reflects the same drive, discipline, and sense of adventure he brings to ministry. If you want to learn what it takes to lead with both strength and heart in today's challenging ministry landscape, you can't miss this. Please welcome Shawn.
It was in May of 2020 that I joined the Willow Creek Community Church staff. Now, if you know anything about Willow Creek's story and its storied history, you know I stepped onto staff following a pretty massive leadership crisis that played out just shy of 2 years before I arrived. If you know anything about our story, you know that when the crisis played out, it was one that sent the 43-year founding pastor into retirement. 24 out of the top 25 leaders resigned, the entire elder board resigned, and as you can imagine, it created quite the leadership vacuum and leadership concern. When we finally stepped in a couple of years later, the culture was still reeling. Staff was still disillusioned, confused, distrust was at an all-time high, and there was so much pain within the staff and the congregation. Yet deep within inside us as a team, we felt very committed and called to the work that was ahead of us. I was asked to share by Gene. He just said, hey, would you just share with us a little bit of what you've learned over the past couple of years, past 5 years on staff at Willow Creek? And it's been quite the journey, and I hope these maybe lessons could serve anybody who finds himself leading in what really is described as a post-crisis type of reality. Now, as I think about that, there's probably a lot of ways to talk about leading in a post-crisis reality. The best way I know how to language it is I've learned the difference between building and rebuilding. You know, everything that I'd known in my 20 years of ministry experience had only been in the realm of building. Been building teams and building ministries, building programs, building campuses, building churches. Maybe you're very familiar with the work of a builder. What I was not familiar with is the work of the rebuilder. I mean, I'd read the biblical books of Ezra and Nehemiah. I understood that rebuilding was a godly work. It was just nothing that I'd ever experienced in my life before. And I found out that building and rebuilding are actually quite different. Now, I'm gonna overly simplify what it means to be a builder. If you think about building, oftentimes what you think about is you put vision in the driver's seat. And when the vision is white hot enough, oftentimes the vision becomes compelling enough that people and resources push toward the vision and help that vision come to reality. Now, I know that's an overly simplistic way to look at it, but I assume that maybe a lot of us, that feels very familiar to the things that we've done and maybe the things that we've built. And the cool thing is, when that vision comes to reality, oftentimes the leader casts even a more compelling vision, which might draw more people and more resources to help that new vision come to reality as well. The challenge in a rebuilding environment is that previous vision has been completely shattered. And I don't want to make it overly dramatic, but in the Willow context, what it felt like when we first arrived is almost like what it looks like to move into a community or drive through a community after a natural disaster, where you could tell that this was once a thriving area with really beautiful buildings, and now all of a sudden everything lays in rubble. And I know that sounds overly dramatic, but that's the feel and the experience of walking into Willow Creek Community Church back in 2020. A storied history, incredible influence, but now because of a crisis, the previous vision truly lay in rubble. And so the challenge when the vision gets shattered is the things that once pushed toward the vision in your people and resources are actually now pushing against you. And depending on the size of the crisis, likely is the size of the resistance you'll experience on the other side of that crisis. Back in 2020, I would describe it as leadership headwinds that I'd never quite faced before. I mean, the leadership headwinds were so strong, we had to try to figure out how do you operate in a rebuilding type of environment. And so I want to share with you 5 things that we learned along the way. I wish I would have had this language 5 years ago. And so if you ever find yourself in an environment like this, I hope these principles could serve you in your journey as well. Here's the first principle. is that in a rebuilding environment, you actually have to put vision to the side and you have to put values in the driver's seat. And the reason is because the vision, again, has been shattered. People are so confused, disillusioned, distrusted as at an all-time high that even if it was the right vision, people aren't at a place to receive it, nor are they at the place to activate it. And so before you decide what you're going to do, you actually have to decide who you're gonna be. Because we had lost sight of who we were gonna be. And so we spent a disproportionate amount of time early on defining what is our mission, what is our vision, what is our values, like who are we going to be, because who we are is going to serve the framework for what we would ultimately become. Now, early on, I would say that when it came to defining who we are and defining our values, they were all aspirational. I mean, we would come up with these values, you put them on the wall, and it was almost a little bit comical because it looked nothing like the way we currently existed. However, as aspirational as they were, we knew that it was going to be the framework that would define who we are and create the guardrails for eventually what we would do and who we would ultimately become. But it all started there. Now, when it comes to recognizing like values in the driver's seat, what you do is you set vision aside, but the second principle is this: the vision has to really take root in the heart of the leader or maybe the leadership team. That even if you're not at a place where you cast the vision yet because people can't receive it and activate it, vision has to be very close to the heart of the leader. Because the reality is you're about to facilitate a lot of change. You're gonna make a lot of leadership decisions, and you have to make sure that those decisions are gonna line up with the vision of where you're going. And so the vision, though set aside from a public perspective, has got to be very clear in the heart of the leader because of all the decisions that you're about to make. Now, in our context, back in 2020, one of the things that was challenging is not as we had a lot of resistance from people, but our financial position was rapidly declining. Again, it probably sounds dramatic, but I would call our financial position in a free fall early on. And with such a rapidly declining financial position, the challenge is we didn't have a lot of time before we needed to make change. Oftentimes, as a new leadership team coming in, you want to make friends before you make change. You want to have a little bit of leadership credibility before you make change. And because of our financial position was so rapidly declining, we didn't have time to make friends before we made change. We just had to make change. And so it was very important for us to recognize what the vision was that we were wanting to pursue, because we were about to make a lot of decisions and change a lot of things, and it had to line up with where we were going. Now, there are a couple things that we had to think about as far as facilitating change. One, and again, they were kind of both connected to where we were going, but also our financial reality. And that is, the first thing that we recognized is we had to change our entire model as a church. Willow operated really kind of with an autonomous campus model where every campus really had autonomy to a lot of different things. It may have been the right model in a more financially healthy season. The challenge is when finances became more limiting, it was a very inefficient model. And so we knew we had to change the model. It was the only way to get to financial efficiency, but also our dream and our vision was really about becoming a multiplying type of church. So we also knew we had to get simpler in order to multiply. And so we literally were going to change our entire model, which fundamentally was going to change everybody's job description in the entire organization at the same time. Now, coupled with that, because our financial position was so drastically declining, we recognized we were a much smaller church than Willow used to be. And so nobody had ever right-sized the size of the staff to the new size of the congregation. We didn't really know how far we needed to go to reduce our staff. Our best target out of the gates is we thought we needed to do a 50% reduction of our staff. And so we were doing a model change, changing everybody's job description in the organization, and we were reducing the staff size by 50% at the same time. Oh, and did I mention we were also in the middle of a global pandemic at the time? And so if you ever want to know if you should change your model, reduce your staff in the middle of a pandemic, I would not recommend those three things at the same time to my closest friends. However, we didn't feel like we had a choice. We had to walk through it. And so as we made 1 million decisions, it was so important to try to align them where we knew we were ultimately going to go. Now, candidly, we didn't get it all right. And it's not surprising that there were some people that left that we should have fought harder for. There were some people that stayed that we should have fought harder for them to leave. There were some people that we had stay that were the right people, but we put them in the wrong seat. And so in our environment, we actually had to do a course correction about 6 to 12 months later that became really, really challenging for us. Which led us to the third piece. It's a really important principle for us that we had to learn to build transparency through trust. And when I talk about building trust, I'm thinking both with our staff, but also with our congregation. Now with our staff, as you hear me describe what we walked and what we went through, you can imagine our staff culture was on life support. And we knew it. You can't make a model shift of that magnitude and reduce your staff to that magnitude and be at a good place as a staff culture. Now we knew that, but we knew we needed to rebuild it. One of the pathways that we chose to rebuild our staff culture is we chose to survey our staff and find out kind of where we were. Now we used a Gallup survey, maybe a lot of you use it at your churches. It's a very kind of common survey that's used to help measure staff culture. And we surveyed our staff, and what we told them was this: we don't want you to gamify the metrics. There's no team that should be incentivized by a higher score versus another. We need the real raw truth. Like we can't make change, or we can't make things better if we don't really know what the problem is. And so we just asked our staff, be as honest as you possibly can with your scores and your comment. It will help us understand where we're at. We begged for transparency, and they were very transparent. They shared with us what we suspected, that our culture was in a really, really tough place. And so after we got those scores, and you took a deep breath, we decided we would do this. And we met with every single team in the church, every ministry team, every campus team. We tried to learn more what was behind the scores. We looked for themes across the organization. We developed an action plan of the 3 steps we thought we could take that would have the greatest impact on our staff culture to the positive. We told our staff what those steps were, and then we worked that action plan, and then we re-surveyed them 6 months later and did the same thing. And we did it again, and we did it again, and we did it again. We did it 6 times in 3 years. Now, it was a lot to do, but at the same time, it was amazing to see the movement. That very first survey, we scored in the bottom 10% of all organizations that take the survey. By the 6th time we took it, we were almost in the 70th percentile of all organizations that take it. Now, I say that as a way to celebrate it, but we also recognize we still have a road to travel ahead of us. It's almost like one of those things that if you're climbing a mountain, you're on your way to the summit. Sometimes it's good to pause and to look back down in the valley and be grateful to God and how far you've come. But it should never stop you in your pursuit to the summit. And so while we're grateful of how far God has brought us, we're still on a path that we believe that God's going to continue to do a great work. But it was transparency that helped us build trust. We asked the staff to be transparent, and they weren't penalized for it, and so they continued to be transparent. We as a leadership team, we were transparent with the decisions we were making, and we were building trust. And God has been so good building trust through transparency with our staff. Now, in addition to that, we were doing the same thing with our congregation. And with our congregation, again, they experienced the same hurt, the same disillusion, the same challenge that our staff did, but maybe in a different way. And so one of the ways that we tackled that is we created these meetings. I called them core gatherings, sometimes stakeholder gatherings. We really invited anybody that wanted to come to these meetings. And what we did was we peeled back the curtain. We let people see what was going on. We talked about the challenges, the goods and the bads, the decisions we were making, why we were making them, and so on and so forth. Now, I will tell you that some of these meetings, they were great. Some of these meetings were really challenging. There were lots of moments in these meetings where people would stand up in the middle, would just start yelling at you, sometimes cussing you out. And I'm like, I don't know what I said to cause this reaction. And so you realize there were landmines all over the culture. The challenge is I didn't know what the landmines were until I stepped on them. And so I would step on them, all the time. But we had to, as leadership, just recognize that these are all the learning lessons we have to have. And it's okay that people are getting out their pain, even if it's sideways. It's a tremendous learning lesson for us to understand where they are. It's a great feedback option for us to understand how to even navigate our next steps. So even the hardest of meetings were actually really valuable meetings. The most annoying part is Willow has its critics, and maybe you've read some of the blogs and articles along the way, and that didn't stop, even by 2020 and beyond. And so we would have bloggers who would either watch the video feeds that we would send out to our congregation, or sometimes they would show up in person at these meetings because they knew we were going to share some hard things. And they would take some of those hard things, the moments of vulnerability and transparency, they would turn it, they would weaponize it against us. It was really, really frustrating. So much so that I thought about stopping these core gatherings because it felt like they were almost working against us as all these blog articles, continued to come out and come out. But then this observation occurred to us as a team, and we recognized that all of the critical noise was all outside of the organization. Inside our church, God was actually building a beautiful relationship of trust. And you have to come to terms with the fact of a leader that God didn't call me to turn the hearts of our adversaries. God called me to pastor this beautiful faith community that God wants to rebuild. And I will trade outside noise for inside trust every day of the week. And so we kept doing it. We kept meeting. We kept showing up. We kept being faithful. And I tell you, over the course of time, God has done an amazing, amazing work rebuilding the trust within our culture. Here's the fourth principle. I would encourage you, if you find yourself in a post-crisis reality, prioritize health over growth. Now, I don't want to set that up as a dichotomy that you have to choose one, health or growth. I think you can actually do both and do both well. The challenge for us early on is we weren't healthy. And as you know, in your own body, healthy cells grow and multiply, so do cancer cells. And so what we didn't want to do, because we weren't at a healthy place, it was not the time of kind of multiplying type of growth. It was a time that we had to get healthy. And we had to get really healthy, and if we were to get healthy, that maybe, just maybe, God would bless us and there would be growth as an outcome, not necessarily as a priority. And so we worked on health, and I talked about some of the things already that we worked on health from a people perspective. We also had to get to a place of financial health. Again, I mentioned earlier that early on, our financial picture was dramatically declining year over year. We actually had 7 consecutive years of financial decline from 2017 to 2024. It's actually kind of hard to keep your eyes up and to keep perspective when that continues to be the decline. What's interesting is other metrics had turned in our organization, a little bit earlier. Attendance started to be up by about year 3, groups engagement, volunteer engagement. There were other things that started trending in a better direction by year 3. Giving was a lagging metric for us. What we discovered was the people who had left just gave it a higher capacity than those who were coming in and newer to our church. 50% of our church was new within the last 5 years. 70% of those who were new within the last 5 years did not come from a previous faith experience. They were brand new believers. And on one end, that was such a great thing because we were accomplishing the mission that God has set us out for. On another end, we were having a hard time making ends meet because of that new reality. And so we had to recognize that you actually have to make some stewardship decisions that require some cuts. And so we did have to cut some staff, we had to cut a campus, we had to do some things like that. But you will never cut your way to financial health. At some point, vision actually has to get back closer to the focus. People need to understand why we exist and what we're going to be about. Vision has to become more infused into the culture because it's not just about cutting your way to health. You have to re-envision your way back to the new health and where you're ultimately wanting to be. By God's grace, 2024 was the first year in 7 years that our income was 4.5% over the year before. Currently in 2025, by God's grace, we're trending about 5% up over last year. And so we're really, really grateful that God has restored health to this area. But it has been a long journey to get here. Here's the fifth principle for us. I would encourage you to stay the course. This is one of those things, if you ever find yourself in a rebuilding situation, I would encourage you, stay the course. Somebody told me earlier, do you know that it's gonna take you 5 to 7 years to turn things at Willow? I'm like, 5 to 7 years? What kind of weak sauce leader needs 5 to 7 years? Apparently this weak sauce leader needs 5 to 7 years. It has taken every bit of the 5 to 7 years that people warned me, but I couldn't have imagined that. Now, what's interesting about this and staying the course, I would say this, you have to stay so grounded in the God that called you. Do you believe that God has called you to this work? Because it's a godly work. It's a hard work, but it's a godly work. You have to stay so grounded in your calling. I would say you have to be so reliant on your convictions That the convictions that God has given you for what's next are truly led by the Spirit? Are you really holding on to those convictions? And are you willing to see the commitment all the way through? Because the challenge is, as you look on the horizon, the data points are going to tell you that nothing that you're doing is successful. But you gotta stay the course, grounded in your calling, your convictions, and your commitment, and I believe in a faithful God who will ultimately see you through. Now, I won't tell you that your path will mirror our path, but here was our path over 5 years. Year 1, it was just hard. I don't know what way to describe it. It was just a hard year. By year 2, we started to see some kind of signs of life and some kind of opportunities of hope. By year 3, we started seeing some cultural shifts. Again, I mentioned some attendance patterns start shifting and group engagement started shifting. The tide started turning a little bit for us. By year 4, we finally got to a place of financial stability, which was really encouraging. And by year 5, which is the year we're in right now, we're ready to put Vision back in the driver's seat. We're ready to become a culture that we're not just rebuilding, we're ready to build for God's kingdom again. And so we're excited about the opportunity that's ahead of us. Can I ask you to pray for something for me? Our 50th year as a church is 2 weeks from this Sunday. It's a massive inflection point for us to look back and celebrate our storied history, but also to look ahead to where God is gonna lead us to next. And so we're excited to cast the new vision of where God's heading, where God is calling us. And really excited that maybe the people and the resources that God has will fuel this vision so that we can take some new ground for God's kingdom. Here's what I believe. I believe in a God who's a redemptive God. I believe a God that loves a story of renewal. And so if you ever find yourself in a place that you're having to rebuild that which was broken, lean hard into a God that loves to renew, to love to restore, loves to rebuild. Last time I checked, our God loves a good resurrection. Be faithful to him. He'll be faithful to you. God bless you.